He was in the shed at 4:30, not because he had decided to be, not because there was an emergency, or because the cows had broken through a fence, or because any of the 100 things that pull a dairy farmer out of bed before dawn had pulled him. He was in the shed at 4:30 because that was where he went when the house felt like it had too much room in it. And since the 3rd week of August, the house had felt like it had too much room in it every morning. The cows knew the routine. They did not require explanation. They came into the bales in the same order they always had, stood the same way, accepted the cups with the same patience they had always shown, and produced milk with the same indifference to human circumstance that dairy cows have always had and always will have. Owen Tate had been milking on this property in the Waikato since 1974. 94 Frisian cows, 210 acres, a share milking arrangement that he had converted to full ownership in 1982 when the previous owner retired and Owen had been able to put together the financing with the help of a rural bank loan and 13 years of accumulated equity in the herd. He had come to the Waikato from Taranaki in 1972 following work, the way young men followed dairy work in New Zealand in the early 1970s, moving between regions as share milking positions opened up, building herd equity in someone else's cows before the possibility of ownership became real. He had been 24 when he arrived in the Waikato. He had been 26 when he met Nora at a young farmers' social in Morrinsville, and 30 when they married and moved onto the property together. Nora had not grown up farming. She had grown up in Hamilton, the daughter of a draper, and she had come to farming the way people who were not born into it come to farming, by deciding that the life made sense to her and learning everything she needed to know to be useful in it. She had learned the accounting first, because it was what the operation needed, and because she was good with numbers in a way Owen was not and had never pretended to be. Then she had learned the pasture management, the rotation systems, the plate meter methodology, the relationship between feed cover and production that determined whether a dairy farm in the Waikato was profitable or not. She had read widely, attended field days, talked to the dairy board representatives and the rural bank officers, and the other farmers' wives who were running the books and the feed programs on properties across the district. By 1987, Owen knew more about his farm's financial position and pasture management system than most farmers in the district, because Nora had made sure he understood what she was doing and why. She had done this deliberately. He had not understood why at the time. He understood in September. His wife Nora had done the books since 1974. She had died on the 17th of August, 1987, after 11 weeks in Waikato Hospital. Owen had been home from the funeral for 9 days when the September milk payout figures came through from the dairy board. The New Zealand dairy industry in 1987 operated through a single-desk seller, the New Zealand Dairy Board, which pooled and marketed all dairy production and returned a payout to farmers based on the season's total revenue divided across total production. The payout for the 1986 to 87 season had been announced at $2.80 per kilogram of milk fat, below the previous season's $3.05 and below the $3.20 that many Waikato farmers had been hoping for after a strong autumn production period. The $2.80 figure was the product of forces that had nothing to do with the Waikato and everything to do with the world dairy market in 1987. The European Economic Community's agricultural support system had continued to generate surplus butter and skim milk powder that competed with New Zealand product in the United Kingdom market. Exchange rate movements between the New Zealand dollar and the pound sterling had compressed the returns on exports that were priced in sterling. The Dairy Board had managed the season's export program as well as the global conditions allowed, but the global conditions had not been favorable. Waikato farmers had been following the payout signals through the season. The board's mid-season indications had suggested $2.90 to $3. The final announcement at $2.80 had been unwelcome, but not a shock. Farmers who had been managing their cost structures on the assumption of $2.90 had 10 cents per kilogram of milk fat to find somewhere in their budgets. For Owen's herd, 10 cents per kilogram across approximately 17,400 kilograms of milk fat for the season was $1,740. Not a catastrophic number for an operation that was otherwise in order. Significant enough that it required attention. He had been giving it attention since the announcement came through. For Owen's herd, 94 cows averaging approximately 185 kilograms of milk fat per cow per season, the difference between $3.05 and $2.80 was significant. At $3.05, his gross payout on the season would have been approximately $53,000. At $2.80, it came to $48,700. The difference was $4,300. He read the figure in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, standing at the bench where Nora had always sat to do the accounts, and wrote the number in the ledger she had kept current. Through May. The last entry in her handwriting was dated the 22nd of May, 6 days before she had gone into hospital for the last time. He continued the ledger from where she had left off. He kept the ledger going from where she left off, and I keep coming back to that, not because it's some big moment, Urhus. It isn't. It's just a man picking up a pen at a bench where somebody else used to sit, but the farm still needed to run. Nora built that system so it didn't all live in one person's head. And in September 1987, that turned out to be the most important thing she'd ever done. Maybe it was also the closest he could get to her right then, just following the system she left behind. The September routine on a Waikato dairy farm in 1987 did not adjust itself for bereavement. The cows needed milking twice a day. The pasture needed to be managed through the spring flush, the period of rapid grass growth that followed the winter slow, that, if mismanaged, would result in wasted feed and reduced milk production at the point in the season when production should be climbing toward its peak. Owen managed the spring flush the way Nora had always calculated it. By walking the paddocks every 3 days with a plate meter, recording the pasture cover in each paddock in a notebook, and making rotation decisions based on the numbers. The plate meter was a tool she had insisted on buying in 1983 after reading about it in the Dairy Exporter. Owen had been skeptical at the time. He had learned to trust it over 4 seasons of watching the data match the production results. He walked the paddocks on the same schedule she had established. He recorded the numbers in the same notebook format. The notebook he used was not Nora's notebook. Hers was in the desk drawer. The last entries from May filled in her clear, unhurried handwriting. He used a new notebook, the same brand, bought from the same stationery shop in Te Awamutu that she had always used. He did not think carefully about why he had bought the same brand. He simply had. The paddock walks took him 40 minutes in the morning after the first milking, on the days he did them. The rest of the morning went to the maintenance work that September required, checking the water troughs, inspecting the fences along the boundaries that the winter had weakened, servicing the effluent pump that moved waste from the yard to the holding pond. None of this was different from any other September. The farm did not know that September 1987 was different from September 1986. The grass grew at the rate the temperature and the moisture and the nitrogen determined, indifferent to what had happened in August. Owen found this steadying in a way he did not try to explain to anyone. The spring flush came in on schedule. The pasture cover numbers in early September showed the herd was on track for a production peak in late October, which was where Owen needed it to be to make the season's payout numbers work. The 2.80 payout was going to require careful management of every other cost line. There was no margin to absorb an inefficient spring rotation. He managed it carefully. The rural bank loan that Owen had used to complete the purchase in 1982 was structured on a 20-year term at 14% interest. The rate environment of the early 1980s in New Zealand, which had been high and had not fully corrected by 1987. The annual debt service on the remaining balance was $18,400. Owen's fixed costs, the loan service, rates, insurance, and the basic maintenance budget Nora had established, totaled $31,200 per year. His variable costs, animal health, fertilizer, fuel, and the relief milker he hired twice a week, now that he was managing alone, ran approximately $22,000 for the season, total costs $53,200 against the $48,700 payout. He was $4,500 short. He sat with that number for an evening in late September at the kitchen table with the ledger open and the calculator Nora had bought at Farmer's in 1984 beside it. He went through the cost lines one by one, the way she had always done, looking for the places where the numbers could move. The relief milker was $3,200 for the season. Necessary, not optional, not while he was managing the afternoon milking alone and still needed occasional time for the farm maintenance that couldn't wait. He did not cut it. The fertilizer program was $8,400, a urea application in September, and a lime dressing in November that had been on the schedule since 1985. He deferred the lime dressing. That was $2,100 saved in the current season with a note to the himself in the ledger margin. Lime, November, 1988. Do not defer. Again. The animal health budget had been $4,200 in the previous season. He reduced it to $3,800, a reduction he considered acceptable given the herd's current health status. Not a reduction he would have made in a season when the herd was showing any signs of stress. The adjustments brought his projected costs to $49,900 against the $48,700 payout. Still short by $1,200. He looked at that gap for a long time. Then he looked at the carry-forward balance Nora had maintained in the operating account. A buffer she had built up over the previous 2 seasons when the payout had been stronger. The balance was $6,400. He drew $1,200 from the buffer and noted it in the ledger. He left the remaining $5,200 in place. He drew $1,200 and left the rest. Worst season of his life, running that farm alone now. Payout came in short of what he needed, and he still only took what he had to. That buffer was Nora's work. 2 good seasons of careful management sitting there for exactly this kind of moment. He used $1,200 of it and left $5,200 right where she'd put it. That's not just discipline. That's someone still farming the way he was taught, even when nobody would have said a word if he'd taken the whole thing. In October, Owen's production numbers came in above his September projection. The spring flush management had worked. The pasture cover data Nora had taught him to read had translated, as it always had, into milk production numbers that tracked the grass availability. His herd peaked at 11.2 kilograms of milk fat per day in the 3rd week of October, which was the highest October peak he had recorded since 1983. He recorded the figure in the ledger. He noted it was a good result. He did not note anything else. The evening milking on good days and bad days looked the same. The cows did not know the difference. The shed smelled the same. The cups went on the same way. The milk flowed into the vat with the same sound it had always made. There were mornings when Owen stood in the shed in the dark before the first cow came in and did not move for a minute or two, not thinking about anything in particular, just standing in the cold and the dark and the smell of hay and animal warmth, with the sound of the cows moving in the yard outside waiting. Then the first cow came in and he put the cups on, and the morning began the way mornings had always begun. He did not talk to anyone about this. The men he knew in the district, the neighboring farmers, the relief milker who came twice a week, were not men who talked about the mornings in the shed in the dark. What they talked about was the payout and the pasture and the price of urea, and Owen was grateful for all of it. Those conversations required him to be present and specific and useful in the way that farming always required. Being present and specific and useful was the only form of continuity he had available to him. Owen worked through October and November in this way, not recovered, not broken, but present, doing the work the farm required, making the decisions the season required, reading the pasture cover numbers and adjusting the rotation and watching the production figures accumulate in the ledger columns the way Nora had watched them for 13 years. The ledger now had 2 handwritings in it. He did not look at that more than he needed to. He looked at the numbers. The numbers were what he could do something about. At the end of November, his accountant, a man named Sherwood in Te Awamutu, who had done Owen's accounts since 1979, came out for the mid-season review. He went through the ledger, checked the production figures, looked at the cost adjustments Owen had made in September, and noted the buffer draw of $1,200. He said the farm was in reasonable shape given the payout. He said the lime deferral was a sensible decision. He said the production numbers were strong, and that if October held into November, Owen would finish the season within a margin he could manage. Owen said he understood. Sherwood was not a man who overused words. He had been doing accounts for Waikato dairy farmers for 22 years, and he had sat across kitchen tables from men and women in every condition that farming produced, good seasons and bad seasons, expansions and contractions, the particular exhaustion of a run of dry summers, and the particular relief of a payout announcement that came in above expectations. He knew what a farm's financial position looked like when it was being managed carefully by someone who understood what they were looking at, and he knew what it looked like when it was drifting. Owen's ledger was being managed carefully. The September entries were precise. The cost line adjustments were documented with reasoning. The buffer draw was noted with a forward plan for replenishment. It was the work of someone who knew what the numbers meant and had made deliberate decisions about each of them. Sherwood looked at the ledger for a moment, at the entries in 2 different handwritings, Nora's from January through May, and Owen's from September onward, with nothing in the gap between them. He did not say anything about it. There was nothing useful to say. He closed the ledger, and they talked about the November fertilizer schedule. The 1987 to 88 season payout came in at $3.10 per kilogram of milk fat, a recovery from the $2.80 of the previous year, driven by improved export returns to the United Kingdom and Japan. Owen's gross payout for the 1987 to 88 season was $54,700. His costs, with the lime dressing reinstated as he had noted in the September ledger, came to $53,600. His net was $1,100. Not a strong year, but a year on the right side of the line. He replenished the buffer account to $5,200 where it had been before the draw. He did not replenish it to $6,400 where Nora had built it. He would get there in time. The farm did not know about any of this. The cows did not know. The pasture grew on its own schedule, as it always had, and required the same management in 1988 that it had required in 1987 and in every year before that. Owen was in the shed at 4:30 every morning, not because he had decided to be, because that was where the work was, and the work had not stopped, and he had not stopped, and in the Waikato in 1987 and 1988 and in every year after that, the distinction between those two things, choosing to continue and simply continuing, was one that Owen did not spend time on. The cows needed milking. He milked them. The grief did not go away. The farm did not stop. Both of those things were true at the same time, and Owen held them both, the way farmers hold the things they cannot resolve, not by resolving them, but by getting up at 4:30 and going out to the shed where the work was, and where the morning was quiet, and where the cows waited with the same patience they had always had.